Let's go real quick to Ephesians, and then we're going to go to the city of Philippi. I think the first service I said we're going to go to the city of Ephesus. It's Philippi, but we're going to start off in the book of Ephesians. Paul says, so then that you walk, see then that you walk circumspectly, which means you got 360-degree view. Not as fools, but as wise. Redeeming the time. Time can actually be redeemed. Because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Understand what the will of the Lord is. Do not be drunk with wine, in which is destructive. He uses the word, or the English word here is dissipation. But be filled, you might even say drunk, with the Spirit. Verse 19. Watch now. Speaking to one another, not just in sermons, but in psalms, hymns, old hymns, new hymns, spiritual songs, which might even be singing in the Spirit, if you will. Singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Notice, we're speaking to one another when we worship and praise, but it all ends up going to the Lord. So Paul, who's in Ephesus, of course, this is under the Roman Empire, a lot of Greek culture and all of that. In these pagan cities, Corinth, Ephesus, what have you, getting drunk was a mark of valor. The Epicureans, if you will, those who worship Bacchus, the god of wine. So getting drunk was a daily thing. I mean, really getting hammered, plowed, was a kind of especially a guy thing. How many of you know drunks like to sing? Well, what is it about alcohol that makes people think they're paparazzi or whatever? You ever go to a karaoke, one of those karaoke places? And most people, Kim, are a little nervous, so they get themselves really messed up. And then they get up there and, oh my God. And they actually think they're sounding good. Oh, cool. So Paul, who's engaging culture, sees all this lasciviousness and wild living. Now, Paul told Timothy to drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. And there's, Jesus drank a little wine. There's a place for drinking a little wine. But this is talking about people falling down drunk. That's not good. Not good spiritually, really not good physically, as we know. So Paul, as he's engaging these cities and this culture, sees this everywhere he goes. And so Paul says, listen, y'all need to stop that, but don't stop getting drunk. Just get on the new wine. Get on the word. Let the Spirit. I mean, those people look drunk. If you walk in, you think those people, they all look like, what in the world? No, they're just full of the Spirit. Just full of happiness, full of joy. Singing to yourself. He says that actually in another epistle of his. But I want to go back to the city of Philippi as Paul's on one of his missionary journeys. Remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about that snake spirit? Remember that? Remember in Acts 16, the spirit of Python? The English word divination, which is the Greek word python, puthos, or python. And it's a snake spirit. I've dealt with snake spirits. In India, it's pretty common. People become what they worship, or they take on attributes, characteristics. They'll hiss and slither like a cobra, like a snake. And this girl, and of course it goes back to the oracles of Delphi, Apollos, and the great python who Apollos killed, took on his spirit, the python spirit. And so she was an oracle. She was a prophetess, false prophet. She was what we might call a psychic today, used of the devil to gain influence and money over people, just like psychics do today. Sometimes it's parlor tricks, sometimes it's black magic, sometimes it's straight demonic. But this girl had the real deal. She had a demon in her. Let's go back to Acts 16 and pick up and see what happens to our heroes, Paul and Silas. And this she did many days. As you know, she followed Paul. These guys are showing us the way of salvation, trying to get an allegiance with them. Paul turned and said to the demon, not her, the demon, I command you in the name of Jesus, come out of her. And he came out, maybe not instantly, but came out within the hour. Amen. Interesting. But when her masters saw that their hope of profit, see, the whole thing was about money. It was a big money thing. They seized Paul and Silas, dragged them into the marketplace to the authorities. Let's read on. And they brought them to the magistrates and said, these men being Jews, exceedingly trouble our city. There's a whole lot of people say that about Jubilee. These Christians are trying to stop the age of Aquarius. On September 11th, it'll be a Wednesday night, Pastor Adam will be Michelle will be in Europe. I'm going to show you a world without God that some people are predicting will be here by 2040. A perfect world for the Antichrist. What will society look like that's godless? What happens when John Lennon's song Imagine really happens? Imagine there's no heaven, no hell, there's no this, there's no that. We find a cure for violence and all of this. And I'll show you a 5-minute clip of some things people are pushing and hoping for. And the masses are dreaming of this age of Aquarius. A world without God, a world without religion, a world without church. As John Lennon said, we'll all be one. Do you know, on his birthday, a few years back, 1 billion people sang that song around the world. Worst song ever written, demonically inspired. I love John Lennon, but a demon inspired that song. I guarantee you, a demon inspired that song. Let's read on. And these Jews teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, pagans, to receive or observe, because they're preaching Christ. Then the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. And this is really beaten, I mean beaten, half to death. And when they had laid many stripes, you know what a stripe is, don't you? That's when you're beaten and it leaves a mark or a scar. So flesh will be torn. They threw them into prison, beaten, threw them into prison, and then commanded the jailer to keep them securely. Let's read on. Having received such a charge, he put them into the inner or the worst part of the prison and fastened their feet in these iron stocks, which would cut into the flesh. Even if you just moved, it would cut to your ankles. So this is a horrible, horrible situation. You know, I'm going to stop right there. Because there are people to this day who get confused when they're doing right and all hell breaks loose. I'm going to church. I'm paying my tithes. What the heaven is going on? Why are all these bad things happening? Where's God? I don't get it. I'm a good guy. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm helping people. And I got all these problems. Well, Paul and Silas could say the same thing. We're preaching the gospel. We've laid down our life for the gospel. We just set a little girl free from a demon, and they throw us in jail after they beat the fire out of us. You know, if I was with Paul and Silas, I might be saying, you guys sure you heard from God? Because none of this looks like God. None of this jail don't look like God. My back, I got dried blood running down my back, and the flies are flying. You ever want to understand demons? Which you should. C.S. Lewis said, don't be enamored with them, but don't ignore them. It's dangerous to ignore the demonic, and it's also dangerous to be too enamored with it. The Catholic Church got way too enamored. They got way too enamored with demonology, and some of it got into their church services, because they had too many conversations with demons. I've had a few, but I keep it short. You know what I mean, Sam? It's like changing a baby's diapers. What you do it quickly. Right, Victor? Or it'll smell and get worse. Here these guys are, serving the Lord, and they're in a hellish situation. Let's go back. Put up the next verse, fellas. But at midnight. Somebody say midnight. Midnight. The apex, midnight. There's PM and then AM. Pre-midnight and after midnight. Takes about, let's say 6 o'clock, it gets dark. It's still dark at midnight. And it's still going to take about 6 hours for the light to come. So midnight is the middle of the night. Some of you right now are in the middle of a mess. And it's midnight. And it's dark. And it's lonely. And it's scary.